If you want to understand what's going on with the Western man today, you need to understand how it's all been set up. It's been set up. And this setup goes back 1,700 years. A carefully orchestrated downfall. A masterpiece, really. Of course, the orchestrators of this downfall don't want you to know what I'm about to tell you. To have any hope at all of understanding the crisis of masculinity that's being faced today, we need to go back 2,000 years to understand the roots of it. So why are men lost? Well, the short answer to that is relatively simple. Men have been deprived of initiatory rites of passage, initiation. Without rites of passage, a man cannot be a man. A man cannot know who he truly is. A man cannot know his higher purpose. A man cannot know his proper place in society. And if you have a whole society founded by men who have not been initiated, who have not gone through their own rites of passage, the very society itself will be sick, will be ill. And that is very much the situation we are facing today, although it goes deeper than that. Without initiation rites, a man does not know not only who he is and does not know his higher purpose, but he does not know where he comes from. He does not know his lineage. He does not know his ancestry. And if you don't know your ancestry, if you don't feel connected to something greater than you in the past, how can you know how you're contributing to the future? How can you know your part to play in the present, in the future? So that is the situation that men are facing today. They have been cut off from their lineage. They've been cut off from their ancestry. They've been cut off from their true history. And being cut off from their true history makes them vulnerable to indoctrination, vulnerable to brainwashing, vulnerable to programming. He's cut adrift, not knowing where he comes from, not knowing where he's going. As a consequence of this, a man can be very easily influenced and indoctrinated by a program, indoctrinated by programming, made to be estranged from his own soul, made to be estranged from his own masculinity, made to be estranged from his own spark, his own defined spark, his own higher self. This inevitably leads to identity crisis, depression, apathy, weakness. Because it's knowing who you truly are, knowing where you come from, and knowing your higher purpose that gives a man strength, gives anybody strength, man or woman. So how lost are men exactly? Well, have a look at some of these statistics. Now I know there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, but these statistics really point towards what I'm talking about here. So according to the recent Washington Post opinion piece, which blew up and received 10,500 comments in the matter of a few days, according to this piece written by Christine Emba, 3 out of 4 bachelor's degrees in the United States are awarded to women. More single young men live with their parents. 3 out of 4 deaths of despair, which include suicide, alcohol abuse, and drug overdose, are men. And 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 in the United States has not had sex in the past year. And then in a YouGov poll in September this month of 2023, 1 in 10 men identify as an incel. That means involuntarily celibate. 1 in 10 men identify. 4 out of 5 of these self-identified incels are under the age of 30, so this implies a huge generational issue. 40% of incels believe they will never have a life partner, and 70% of incels are active in online forums discussing their personal life. So what does this all show? This all shows what in shamanic societies they would refer to as soul loss. Men who have lost connection with their soul, men who have lost connection with something deep inside of them, something innate inside of them, something powerful inside of them. Men have lost touch with their force. Men have lost touch with their power. Men have lost touch with their nobility. Men have lost touch with the warrior within. So how did it come to this? Well, if we can understand how it came to this, we will have the key to addressing the problem. This is the result of 2 factors working together. 1, men have been cut off from initiation rites. Rites of passage, initiation into the mysteries of existence, something that has always existed in the ancient world and that was hijacked about 1,700 years ago, and it's been hijacked ever since. So men have been deprived of initiation rites. Initiation rites are what turn a boy into a man. It's what gives a man an understanding of his place in the greater picture. It's what gives a man an understanding of his higher purpose and how to be a contributing and useful member of his society. So, being deprived of initiation rites is the first thing, and in the second, Man in the 21st century has grown up and continues to live in a civilization and in a culture that is being heavily engineered, socially engineered. It is naive to believe that culture is just spontaneously evolving on its own and that these trends emerge of their own volition. No. Our culture and our civilization as a whole is being guided by an elite few who have tremendous knowledge of sorcery, who have tremendous knowledge of the occult arts, who have tremendous knowledge of psychology and how to manipulate it, who have tremendous knowledge of chaos magic and how to harness power from weaving chaos, how to harness power from destroying and traumatizing and manipulating and pitting people against each other, pitting groups against each other. We are living in a civilization that is being run by principles of black magic. So these two things working together, the loss of initiation rites going back over 1700 years, and the fact that we live in a civilization being dominated by social engineering and principles of black magic. These two work together to create a very difficult situation for the modern Western man. And it is essential that we understand this. If we don't understand this, we don't have a hope of addressing it in an effective way. So the first reason, the loss of initiation rites, let's understand this. In indigenous cultures, there still exist initiation rites. These are what take place on the transition from adolescence to manhood. A male in the tribe is not considered a man unless he passes through the rites of passage into manhood. The rites of passage break down the adolescent. They break down the psychology of the adolescent. It's a death. It's an initiatory death. The adolescent needs to die. The boy needs to die in order to be reborn a man. This creates a very important transition in the psychology of a man to go through a rite of passage into manhood. These rites of passage often involve psychedelic ceremony, entheogenic ceremony, shamanic ceremony. They're often carried out by the shamanic figurehead. Now, I'm generalizing here. I'm stereotyping even here. I'm not speaking about any one particular tribe. I'm talking about the phenomena of an indigenous culture with rites of passage still intact, with shamanic elderhood still at play, with guidance and elderhood, and a rite of passage from boyhood into manhood. We can see that happening in a healthy way, and it brings the young man into an ordeal that shatters his immaturities, that is a kind of useful trauma, a useful death, so that he can become reborn and become a useful man. And he can receive in this ordeal a vision for his role in society. And he can receive an epiphany about his higher self, about his higher function, about his role in the society. Now you could say that, well, we've never had that in Western civilization, but that's not true. In Western civilization, we had this for 2,000 years in ancient Greek culture, in what is referred to as the mysteries. The mysteries are initiation rites of passage into a higher state of consciousness. They were psychedelic rites of passage. And they weren't just limited to men, they were open to men and women. But the Greek mysteries were ongoing for almost 2,000 years, and they were the fountainhead of Greek civilization. All the great philosophers, all the great statesmen, all the great dramatists, all the great artists, all the great leaders of Greek civilization were initiated into the Greek mysteries. It was unthinkable to be a productive member of Greek society if you were not initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. These mysteries are death and rebirth initiation rites, and they involve a psychedelic sacrament. So for 2,000 years, Greek civilization was founded upon a psychedelic mystery school that initiated men and women into the greater mysteries of existence. And through this, they connected to something within them that was immortal, something within them that transcended the mortality of their body, the mortality of their time and place, something greater than themselves. Without this knowledge, without this initiation, without this gnosis, how could a man hope to find the right bearings in life? So this was ongoing in Egypt for thousands of years. This was ongoing in Greece for almost 2,000 years. And this is something that most people don't know. But the first 200, almost 300 years of Christianity also contained psychedelic rites of initiation. This is something that most people don't know, and for very good reason. It was concealed. It was eradicated. This rite of passage was brutally suppressed. So for the first 200, almost 300 years, Even the first Christians were undergoing initiations. And through these initiations, they were connecting to something eternal within themselves and something eternal in the cosmos. The mysteries of the divine, the mysteries of the divine, the mysteries of eternal life, the mystery of that which survives the death of the physical body. Without this, how could a man hope to find his bearings in life? How could a man know who he truly is? How could a man know what his higher purpose in life is? So everything went to hell in the 300s. This is where the problem really begins, and if we had to trace a ground zero for why men are so lost today, we can trace it back to the 300s. The infiltration of early Christianity by the Roman emperors. The Roman emperors invaded Christianity and took it over, and they got rid of the rites of initiation. They got rid of the psychedelic sacrament, and they got rid of the esoteric knowledge. They stripped it down, and they just kept the outer husk, the dogma, but they got rid of the gnosis. And so, this rigidified and this spread into the world is what we now know today to be Christianity. But actually, I prefer to call it churchianity, because the real Gnostic core, the real initiation rites that were always integral from the beginning were taken out, hollowed out, and what was given to the world was an empty shell. And so here is the beginning of the problem, and this is what nobody quite understands. So not only were the initiation rites removed from early Christianity, but the Greek mysteries were disbanded. So in the year, I believe it was 385, Emperor Theodosius made this hollow husk of churchianity the state religion of Rome, and at the same time, he banned and disbanded the Greek mysteries. So the stage was set for the problem that we're seeing today. That's over 1,600 years ago. The problem has been there for over 1,600 years. Once we understand that, the situation men face today will start to make more sense. So after the rites of initiation were removed from Western civilization and suppressed, and all traces of it were eradicated, we enter into what history has sometimes referred to as the Dark Ages. And indeed, the light of the mysteries, the initiation light, was hidden from man. And it remained hidden for nearly 1,000 years. But then something very special happened in the 1400s. You have a return of the rites of initiation back to Western civilization in the period known as the Renaissance. Now, what was going on in the Renaissance? Well, a lot was going on under the surface of things. You have a group known to history as the Rosicrucians. These were initiated Christians. These were mystical mages and alchemists and astrologers and great artists and inventors, and basically Western civilization's equivalent of shamans, but they were Christian. They were like Christian mages. They formed a secret society, and they were working in direct opposition to the Roman Church. They were trying to bring initiation wisdom back to Western civilization, but they couldn't do it openly because it was so dangerous. So they formed a secret society and did it esoterically. And so all the great artists of the Renaissance and all the great inventors and all the great advances that took place in the Renaissance, they can be traced back to activity that was taking place esoterically, behind the scenes and underground. So this was a moment of hope for Western civilization, the return of rites of initiation back to Western civilization. However, this was very badly corrupted, and this is another essential turning point in history that men need to understand. The impulse of the Rosicrucians, or to put it more broadly, the good guys, was seized upon and inverted. We see this kind of duality in movies, but it's actually really happened in history. Like in movies, we see the Jedi Knights and the Sith, or we see the wizards and the dark wizards. Well, that's how it actually worked in history. If the Rosicrucians were the good wizards, then you had a group of evil wizards that used the same knowledge, but they inverted it, and they corrupted it. And they used it not to spread enlightenment, not to bring initiation knowledge back to Western civilization, but to exploit it to its fullest extent, to have as much power as possible, to control and manipulate. And this is something that we need to understand. Something took place in the 1700s that could be called the corruption of initiation knowledge and the using of initiation knowledge to have mastery and power over the masses. This was a turning point in history, but it took place behind the scenes, so you don't read about this in the history books. But men of Western civilization need to understand this, because this is a hugely important turning point in the history of Western civilization, the corruption of the mysteries that the Rosicrucians were trying to spread to combat the stranglehold that the Roman Church had upon civilization. But their efforts were hijacked, very badly hijacked. And 200 years after they began their work, you see now the rise of a certain kind of phenomenon we call occultism, that we call secret societies that were not working for the good of humanity, but were actually working for the benefit of an elite few. And this has continued up until this very day, and herein lies the problem. This is very important that men understand this. If they don't understand this, they will not understand the world in which we're living in today. So starting in the 1700s, especially towards the end of the 1700s, you have this phenomenon of the evil white man, these corrupted initiates of secret societies, and they were indeed white, and they were indeed evil. They were psychopaths. So when they say that the white man is the devil, it's not entirely untrue. There was a few corrupt, evil men who ruined it for everybody. They took the initiation knowledge and they corrupted it. They used it in an evil way. So these few evil white men became incredibly powerful, and they started to influence culture. And this is what is important to understand. They became so powerful that they were able to steer the evolution of the civilization itself. They started steering the evolution of the civilization itself through massive amounts of money and orchestrating war. And so the secret society philosophy spread, and these secret society people began to dominate everything, including the education system, the culture itself. They steered the scientific revolution in the direction of materialism. You have the stage set for materialism back in the 300s when they removed the gnosis from Christianity. That was the beginning of materialism, because without the gnosis of the spirit, it's inevitable that you fall into materialism. So the seed for materialism was planted centuries before, but it was harvested and encouraged in the 1800s. In the 1800s, you have the rise of economic predation. You have the rise of super rich, super wealth. You have the phenomenon of the super wealthy orchestrating war and manipulating the development of civilizations and cultures. You have now a few powerful men doing sorcery and black magic upon the masses. You have the phenomenon of a few powerful men controlling the media, being able to decide the stories that get put out there, the beginning of programming, the beginning of social engineering through media. If you can control what people believe, you're a master over the people. So this is the beginning of a phenomenon that we could call social engineering. And it is absolutely essential that men in the 21st century understand the reality of social engineering and the history of social engineering. Because it is only by understanding the history of social engineering that a man is going to be able to discern the truth today in the 21st century. We cannot afford to be naive about these things. Our rites of initiation, our rites of passage have been cut off. And cut off from our rites of passage, we have been subjected to a civilization that bombards us with manipulation. All this social engineering operates on principles of black magic, operates on principles of, you could call it chaos magic, although that's not exactly the appropriate term. If you take those words literally, magic of the chaos, you can cause chaos in a very specific way and harness it in a very specific way. For example, if you had enough money and you had enough psychological understanding of the human condition, you can manipulate things in such a way as to cause problem and then stoke the reaction and then steer everything in a desired direction. If you had enough money, you can fund both sides of a war and then harness the result to a desired end. If you had enough power, you could cause a trauma in 1 century. If you were operating in a dark esoteric lineage, the trauma that your predecessors caused in 1 century, you now get to harvest in the next century. So it's like this. There's an unbroken chain of dark magic, just as there's an unbroken chain of good magic. I get to that in other videos. But there's an unbroken chain and a coherent narrative that operates under the principles of black magic So you need to understand how black magic operates, or you will be lost. You will be victimized by it. So all of these things that happened that we cry out against, capitalism, communism, these were all deliberately orchestrated. Capitalism in itself is not inherently bad, but the way that it has been defined, the way it has been executed, is been corrupted. There is a corruption that has taken place. Communism, people think communism arose out of the will of the people. No, communism was hatched and deliberately launched on the world as a tool of chaos magic, as a way of harnessing psychological trends, as a way of harnessing human psychology. Social engineering preys upon human psychology. Those who are determining the social engineering, the masterminds of the social engineering, have a masterful understanding of human psychology, of trauma, of how to harness trauma, of how to predict reactions to trauma. This is the world we're living in. It's necessary for men to understand this. If a man doesn't understand this, he will be lost. So we arrive at the 20th century, and already there is tremendous amount of manipulation happening by the elite, powerful few. They're conspiring to cause world wars. They are conspiring to cause a world war and then harness the results of it. They're stoking every side of a conflict in order to draw as much power from possible from the chaos. They cause one problem and then they cause the solution and stoke a destructive solution. We see that happening time and time again in history. So once you understand how this manipulation works, how this evil sorcery works, you can understand and better appreciate why men are in such a difficult predicament today. This has been 1700 years in the making. So with the advent of the world wars and mechanized warfare, you have now the death of the warrior archetype, because you no longer need strength and bravery to prevail in battle. It no longer matters if you're a great warrior, because now a bullet can be fired by anybody and can kill anybody. So now you have a new trauma for man, a trauma of meaninglessness. What does their life matter? And so our grandparents and our great-grandparents, they suffered through this trauma. Not even warriorship meant anything anymore. After the Second World War, you have now the advent of television, and with television, a new era of programming is ushered in. In the 50s and 60s, you have a conservative programming prevailing, but then in the 70s, with the advent of LSD, lo and behold, you have the hope of spiritual rites of passage, but even these were hijacked. You don't have to dig very far to understand the role that the CIA played in the proliferation of LSD. By the time the 80s rolled around, you had materialism reaching a high tide, and you had values of masculinity being embodied by Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Remember those movies? Yeah, you had materialism and values of masculinity being entirely materialistic. All the while, you have one of social engineering's great masterpieces, and that is modern feminism. See, the trick, and what we need to understand, is that the way that this sorcery works is to take a real psychological need, a real injustice, and propose a solution that on the surface seems to solve the injustice. But actually, it's a deceptively corrupted solution. It's a fake solution. And this has happened over and over again throughout history. The fake solution. The fake solution to capitalism is communism. The fake solution to a corrupted patriarchy is feminism. We see this phenomenon continuing again more recently with social justice. Yes, there's injustice. Yes, there's very serious social injustice. But the solution we've been given is devil shit. It's a deception. Just like feminism is a deception. It was a good and important impulse, but the way that it was cultivated was manipulated. It was manipulated, just like social justice today is being manipulated. Men of the West, understand how these manipulations work. Now here's the catch. It's initiation knowledge that gives men the capacity to see these things. If men are not initiated into the mysteries of the spiritual world, if men are not initiated into magic, and they're not initiated into alchemy, and they're not initiated into the mysteries, they lack the capacity to perceive these things. So don't you see how things have been set up? Men have been cut off from initiation, and with that, they've been cut off from the ability to perceive how the corrupted initiates are manipulating everything. That's the problem. So with the late 90s and the 2000s, now we have the internet. We have the digital age coming full steam ahead. And so men have been set up already. The Gnostic rites of passage have been taken away centuries and centuries and centuries ago. So men's ancestors, men's fathers and fathers' fathers and mothers' mothers, they've been cut adrift, not having the gnosis that gives people a solid foundation to build a life upon. And so they're screwed up. They're traumatized. They're alcoholics. And they're miserable. And they're violent. And they're screwed up. Really screwed up. So you have generation upon generation upon generation that is really screwed up. And this trauma keeps heaping itself upon the next generation. You have in the 20th century world wars, great wars. You have generations of men with shattering traumas. Then you have decades of programming, decades of propaganda. Men are now being controlled. Men are being indoctrinated. By the 2000s now, the educational systems are being infiltrated and agendas are being pushed, agendas that are already setting the stage for men in the situation that men find themselves in today. It's a plan. You have to understand it's an evil plan. We are living in the middle of an evil plan. If you don't understand that we are living in the middle of an evil masterpiece, then you will not be able to find your way in the world in which you are living. Already, this plan to turn everybody against the white man was in play over 20 years ago, over 30 years ago. It started in the universities. Liberalism became the breeding ground for an ideology that would eventually turn liberals against men, that would turn Western civilization itself against men and leave men in the situation that they find themselves in today. So you have the early seeds of wokeism being planted in the educational system over 30 years ago. You see, it's a plan. Feminism was part of a plan. Wokeism is part of a plan. Social justice agenda is part of a plan. It's all part of a plan. You need to understand that. So the social engineering continues to get more sophisticated. It continues to get more effective as we pass into the 2010s. Again, you have the exploitation of this movement towards queer rights. This movement, again, like feminism, again, like social justice, it is based on a truth. It is based on an injustice. It is based on inequality, but it is being manipulated. It is being harnessed. The traumas are being harnessed. You have to understand that these principles of social engineering are based on black magic. They're based on exploiting trauma. It's like they put a little bit of extra evil juice on the trauma to make the trauma, to put the trauma on steroids. People have a trauma response, and there are forces guiding things in such a way that the trauma is being inflamed so that the solution is a toxic solution. We're living in a culture that is being manipulated constantly by black magic. All the while, men are addicted to their screens, they're addicted to their phones, they're addicted to the mythology that cinema's putting out, these superhero myths where the superheroes are completely unrelatable. They're all so beyond human that they're impossible to relate to. Men are starved for mythology. Men are disconnected from anything resembling a lineage. They don't connect to Christianity. They've been given religion. They've been given materialism as a religion. They're disconnected from anything truly spiritual. They're cut adrift. They're disconnected from the mysteries of God because the mysteries of God always came through initiation. So they're cut off from the mysteries of God. They're cut off from the mysteries of God. They're cut off from the mysteries of their own divine self, their own divine spark. If they're cut off from the mysteries of their own divine spark, they're cut off from their own higher purpose. They have no idea what their purpose is in society. If they don't know what their purpose is in society, they can be easily controlled. They're told what to do in their educational system by their parents. They're told what to do, and they do it. And they feel a disconnect from it. They get a soul loss. They become depressed. They start dealing with their depression in destructive ways. Alcoholism. Men are getting increasingly lost. And the new generations are even more lost because their fathers were lost. And they grew up with a phone in their hand, a smartphone in their hand. They grew up glued to the screen. They've been getting programmed. They're completely cut off from anything resembling ancestral wisdom. They're being educated by the internet. They're being dominated by these agendas and the social engineering. They're receiving a completely indoctrinated education in school. They don't know what to value anymore. Their parents aren't helping them because their parents don't know either. Their parents are probably screwed up and depressed and on medications and on antidepressants or alcoholics or cold and cut off from their love. And the father is unable to give a positive masculine role model. Half of all families are divorced. They're not getting any values from their parents. and they're getting a whole range of programming on the screen. They're becoming addicted to pornography, addicted to video games, addicted to internet chatting. AI girlfriends are just around the corner. So we're now in the 2020s, and men are in a pretty bad predicament in general. There are a few spiritual warriors who are seeking initiation intuitively. They've already been seeking initiation for 20 years now, like me. I started seeking initiation over 20 years ago, and there's others like me out there. But the majority are lost. The majority are cut off from God, from the Creator, because the connection to the Creator is not forged in church. The connection to the Creator is forged through initiation. And as I said, over 1,600 years ago, the church concealed the rites of passage for men. So for 1,600 years, men have been going without initiation. How can they be men without initiation, without rites of passage? So men are cut off from the mysteries of God. They're cut off from the mysteries of their divine spark. They're cut off from their higher purpose, because if you don't know your own divine spark, you don't know your own divine purpose. And because they grew up in a civilization that is built on social engineering and principles of black magic, they have just been victimized, and they've been set up. They've been set up to be scapegoated. Because it's true, a handful of white psychopaths, of white men, yes, white men, they were the devils. There was a handful of white men, and there are in this world today a handful of white men who are evil, who are truly evil, and they are ruining it for everybody else. But they are setting up you, a good man trying to lead a good life. You've been set up. So the social engineering over the past 300 years is culminating now with you being set up. So it's a grand masterpiece. It's an evil masterpiece. And that is why men are so lost. Men need to be spiritual warriors. There's something deep within the collective consciousness of man. There's something deep within the soul of man that yearns to be a warrior, because there's evil in the world, and a man has an innate impulse to defend against the evil, to be a warrior. But unlike the past, we are not living in a physical war. We are living in a spiritual war today. There are spiritual forces of evil that are at work in the world. And a man feels deep in his soul that he needs to be some sort of warrior, but he doesn't know how to be that warrior, because to be the warrior, he needs to be initiated. He needs to be initiated into the history of the war. He needs to be initiated into how to do battle. The current man today, the average man today, is neither initiated into the history of the war. And for many men listening to this, you probably have never heard this before. Some, yes, those who are already on the path of initiation, this is just confirming what you already know. But the majority of men out there do not know this. They do not know that rites of passage were stripped out of Christianity, for example. They do not know about social engineering, although more and more people are waking up to the reality of social engineering. What happened in 2021 really started to wake people up to the reality of social engineering, but it's necessary for men today, in order to be spiritual warriors, to understand how men have been set up, how we have been framed, to know the history of it, and moreover, to be initiated. Men need to be initiated into the spiritual warriorship in the 21st century. They need to be connected to an ancestral lineage, and they need to know their history. They need to know the history of the civilization of which they are a part, and they need to be initiated as spiritual warriors. Spiritual initiation has been concealed from men. We need to retrieve it. If men are not initiated, they are not going to be real men in the 21st century. They're not going to be able to defend anybody or anything, much less themselves. So what can we do? Well, in this video right here, we explore solutions.